Now please welcome Paul Noglows, founder and executive producer, Forbes AgTech; Beth Bechdol, president and chief executive officer, AgriNovus Indiana; John Hartnett, founder and chief executive officer, SVG Partners; Bruce Taylor, chief executive officer, Taylor Farms; and Carter Williams, chief executive officer, iSelect Fund.
All right. Okay, well, hello everyone again, and really excited for this conversation. We're focused on building an ag innovation ecosystem. And I know when people see that, it may be like, okay, well, this is going to be interesting, and we're going to be talking in a bunch of hypotheticals of what could be. But this morning, we've actually got 4 people who have done this and done it successfully in different parts of the country. So we're going to focus first on Salinas. We've got 2 of our friends from Salinas here. We've got John Hartnett from SVG.
Hey, welcome to Salinas.
Bruce Taylor from Taylor Farms. And I'm just going to set it up with a little bit of history, and some of this may not even be 100% correct. And then I'm going to turn it over to John. Basically, about 5 years ago, when John invited me and Forbes out to see Salinas and to see what was going on there, we were doing a series called Reinventing America, and we were looking at how different cities and regions were reinventing themselves through industry. So we did advanced manufacturing in Chicago, we did reinventing the workforce in Chicago. We actually came here in November of 2014 and focused on healthcare innovation. Anyway, more and more we were having people tell us that we should focus on the farm and look at agriculture and look at these amazing changes and innovations that were taking place. So John had us out. He took me down to Salinas, and I've got to say, it wasn't that pretty of a picture. It was a city, kind of reminded me of a movie set, and it was a lot of empty storefronts. The city itself was having problems, high dropout rates, gangs, all sorts of those problems that can plague a smaller sized city. Anyway, they had come up with a plan, and when I say they, it was a combination of John and SVG, the city of Salinas, private partnerships with Taylor Farms, academics. They have Hartnett Community College. Anyway, they came up with a plan, and that plan is what they've put into action over the last 5 years, and they've actually been successful, and successful to a degree that I'm not even sure they could have imagined. Anyway, I'm going to turn it over to John, and I'm going to have him talk to you a little bit about how you actually start something like this and how you go about actually executing on a plan. And so I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Paul. Nice to be upgraded to your friend. Just a little bit of history. 2012 was actually a tough year for the city of Salinas. One of the largest employers there at the time laid off about 850 people. So the motivation to do something was high in terms of the city was dealing with a crisis. I've been based in Silicon Valley for 20 years. I don't have a Californian accent. I'm originally from Ireland and spent a lot of time supporting the Irish revolution in Europe around technology. My background is all around technology, not around agriculture. And we got together with the city of Salinas, Salinas is about 1 hour south of Silicon Valley. A phenomenal hub, in terms of fresh food. And like Paul said, I'd never visited Salinas, even though it was 1 hour away. I had no idea of the scale of the agriculture sector there. And what became very obvious when we engaged with the leadership there, both from the city and with Bruce and some of the key leaders in the academia side, was the strength there was agriculture. The proximity to Silicon Valley was 1 hour away, but yet we might as well have been on the other side of the planet. There was no conversation with investors, technology, etc., in a meaningful way. So that's really where we started. I was thankful to have met with Bruce, who's a phenomenal leader and visionary for the agriculture industry, and being able to set out a plan where we created an ecosystem. And that sounds like a great buzzword. I mean, it's really kind of 4 key things that we focused on. Great companies are built by great people. So how do we get great people, entrepreneurs, R&D from universities, entrepreneurs from all over the world? How do you put an accelerator together to advance those companies and make them really, really successful? How can you put investment, strategic investment from the industry behind them? And then the 4th one, how can you bring major corporations around the world that are looking for these great people together? So that was kind of the framework that we put together. If I fast forward to what's happened over those 7 years, I have to say, Paul, when we met with Forbes, it was, I know it was a bit of a shock to the system when you came to the world from lovely New York to a rural area, but I think it was a great partnership from our point of view, because I felt that we had a strategy, we had a strength, and we had a story to tell. And I think having been here for the last 3 days, there's a great story to be told here, and part of it is amplifying and shining a light on what's already working really, really well. So we just helped to kind of build the structure, put focus around agriculture and technology, and drive a process and execute on it.
Was there an initial resistance to, kind of, they had lived off the John Steinbeck legacy, the Grapes of Wrath, all that, and building an ag tech epicenter or ecosystem, that's pretty far removed from that. Was it difficult to build consensus and coalition?
I think that obviously John Steinbeck is known worldwide, and it's obviously an incredible story. But the story of some of the big multi-billion-dollar companies in the agriculture sector is known to everybody, but not collectively recognized as being in Salinas. And again, as I mentioned, the world of technology and investment, we're not interested in agriculture. When I mentioned agriculture 7 years ago in Silicon Valley, people were kind of saying, whoa, are you serious? But when you look at the macro picture of the demand and supply discrepancy, the challenges that the industry is facing, the growth in terms of being able to support that growth, innovation is going to be the key to the solution here. And yes, there was resistance. There was skepticism around technology. What do those guys in Silicon Valley know about our business and our problems? And I have to say, on the other side, you had a lot of entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley running around solving problems that didn't exist. Right. So it was kind of bringing it together was a key part of what we've been able to do.
And Bruce, I'm going to ask you, with a lot of these initiatives, it's very easy to pay lip service and say, yes, I'm backing this and I'm on board. Why don't you talk to us a little bit about the decision, to invest $40 million in a new corporate headquarters on a main street that anyone could tell had seen better days. And I'd be very interested, in our prep call, we talked quite a bit about, I'm sure you had a way, one, what's good for Taylor Farms, what's good for the company.
Yep.
Obviously, you're committed to the community, what's good for Salinas and the Salinas Valley. But then also you brought up, and it was really telling to me, what's good for the industry. And I'm not sure how often you hear that, so anyway.
Well, just to be clear, I'm glad to welcome John to Salinas. Born in Ireland, but lives in Silicon Valley, which, as he says, is worlds apart. Apparently, anybody else here from Salinas? Didn't think so. Yeah, I'm the only loser born and raised there, but it's worked out well so far. So Paul, to answer your question, kind of how this started was when I was leading a trade organization, Western Growers, which represents 1,200 vegetable growers in California and Arizona. And every meeting I'd go to, a board meeting, you'd just get depressed for what the state of California, the legislature, was doing to us, right? Every meeting we'd have less water so the salmon could have more water to swim back out to the ocean. We'd have less tools to use. We'd have more labor trouble and more inspections. I think we deal with 72 different government organizations in the state of California. I have to tell you, it's awfully refreshing to come here to Indiana. This is a fantastic business environment. But what I realized was that here we are, we're all competing with each other like we're supposed to, right? And we're beating the crap out of each other. Meanwhile, the state legislature is beating the crap out of all of us. And so I finally realized it's time to figure out a different way. And so the whole thrust behind the ag tech movement, and Salinas is kind of the natural headquarters, because that's the headquarters of most of the leafy greens growers in the world, I'd say, at least in the US. And that's why Salinas is a real important place to have that ag tech headquarters. But the whole thrust has been to try to get these people that have been competing with each other. They live next door to each other, but they don't like each other that much, and they don't talk to each other that much, is how do you start to break down that wall and start to create that collaboration so that we can figure out things faster, so we can figure out how to farm lettuce with less water, so we can figure out how to harvest romaine with fewer people, so we can figure out how to use fewer chemicals that people are taking away from us anyway. And so that was really the thrust for us to jump in, and it really is an effort to save the row crop industry in California, I think. And so that was part one. Part two was more the local aspect, Paul, that you talk about, which is how do we help Salinas have a reason for being, and how do we become a nexus for redevelopment? And this, as I said, this made sense. This was, ag is about a third of the economy in Salinas, Monterey County. Headquarters are there, so all the decision makers are there, and so you can actually make an impact there. And so that's why we picked Salinas. And then from our perspective, from a business perspective, a couple of our biggest and most successful operations are in Salinas. And you talked about the gang problem. I think we have the highest murder rate per capita in the country. We have the second lowest affordability rate for housing relative to average incomes. And apparently we were the second worst education outcomes too. And I said, well, I'm tired of being second. Let's go lead something. But anyway, so our stats weren't very good, right? And so there's kind of only one way to go but up. And so we decided that we're dependent on Salinas and the health of the city for our health as our company. And so we said, let's invest in downtown Salinas. So we built a headquarters downtown. We have a couple hundred people there. And that's, as you say, Paul, it's helped revitalize downtown.
It certainly has. Just in the short time that I've been associated with Salinas, I mean, they really went from what I visioned as empty storefronts, not a lot there. It really is funny. Chris Hellman was saying, blew my mind. Well, it blew my mind last summer when the New York Times did a travel article and actually was talking about Salinas as a nice destination to go.
That blew my mind too.
Okay. All right.
They had really dark glasses on.
So, anyway, we're gonna continue the conversation, and I'd like to travel from Salinas right here to Indiana, and I'm going to turn it over to Beth Beco, President and CEO of AgriNovus, to talk to us a little bit about what's going on here and how they're trying to build an ag innovation ecosystem, and highlight some of both the successes and the challenges of what you're finding.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks to everybody for being a part of this conversation. We've really enjoyed watching the dynamics of the Forbes-Salinas relationship, and I really hope that Indiana and Indianapolis can continue these kinds of achievements and successes that come. I think one of the things you have to always know before you start an ecosystem plan, know your resources, know your assets. And so as we thought about this space of food and agricultural innovation, we realized in Indiana we had some other industry clusters that the state is really strong in that are today converging and colliding with food and agriculture at a really incredible pace. And so that's why many of you have seen either on collateral or on the program, we use the word here in Indiana, the agbioscience sector. And we very purposefully put plus signs in the middle of that word to show you that we're talking about a sector that is 21st century, modern, high-tech, production agriculture, row crops, animal production. But it's also this space of bio and life sciences and pharma and human health, which is a standout industry cluster. Many people might not know. You might think about the Bostons and the Philadelphias and even the Silicon Valleys of the world, but Indiana is home to an amazing life sciences sector. And then science and tech. So we've redefined this space a little bit differently than maybe others would, but that's, again, know your assets. Leverage the things that you already have, make them better, and bring people around those. So AgriNovus was formed about 4 years ago. We're an economic development entity. We're a nonprofit. We receive funding from state government, very supportive. You can tell from our morning conversation with Governor Holcomb and President Daniels that we're very fortunate here in Indiana to have that kind of collaborative spirit from our State Economic Development Corporation, from our State Department of Agriculture. It's been tremendous. But our industry support, our academic support, the philanthropic organizations that are here, everybody had a strong appreciation that agriculture was a central industry segment for the state. Couple of things. We hadn't told our story well. We also hadn't figured out how to start working across industry lines to start finding those ways that agricultural companies could start collaborating with life sciences business, with tech firms, with advanced manufacturing. And so AgriNovus sort of sits at the center of all that, I guess, working to try to build this ecosystem. And we, like John, have a couple of pillars that are really important to us. So again, I think those will sound very similar. We focus on telling the story. AgriNovus very purposefully takes on the mantle to amplify the story of the ag biosciences in the state of Indiana. We want to be there to echo the successes of Corteva, to talk about how wonderful it is to have a standalone Elanco spin out of Eli Lilly, to talk about our animal genetics firms, our popcorn genetics firms, the tech companies that are spinning out of Purdue University. Somebody's got to be the megaphone for that. The last two are talent and workforce. So much like John referenced, we know we need a 21st century tech-oriented, ag innovation-ready human capital pipeline. So how do we get into high schools? How do we get into colleges and universities? And as a Boilermaker myself, I have to spend more time in Bloomington. I have to spend more time in South Bend, at Notre Dame, and at plenty of other colleges and institutions here in the state who have tremendous students with skills in informatics, in genetics, in biology, in computer science, and get them to think about ag innovation, ag tech as a career trajectory. And the last is starting programs that can really accelerate entrepreneurial activity. How do we make sure that we have a climate here where early stage companies can thrive, can have the resources and the infrastructure they need? And so we get to be at the center of bringing all of those different pieces together.
And I want to come back to one of the points you made about education and how that all fits in. I do want to go over to Carter Williams. Carter is the head of the iSelect fund. They do an event that I, like a dummy, wasn't able to attend last year, but I'm fully confident that I'm going to attend this coming year. It's called Davos on the Delta. And I'd love, Carter, if you could talk a little bit, just what the regional efforts are, what you have going on in different places. And, you know, I have a tendency, I've been pretty much myopically focused on Salinas and Indianapolis, but it's refreshing to hear that this is also going on elsewhere.
Yep. And we are not focused on a geography. We were focused on the fact that if you go to Silicon Valley, why does Silicon Valley work well? They have entrepreneurs coming out of institutions. They have early adopter customers willing to buy products that are sketchy. They have risk capital that is willing to invest in things. They've seen success and failure, and they understand how to look at it. And then they've got a pay-it-forward network where there are people that were successful and now they're willing to do something else and try to help the next entrepreneur. And so I've been in technology my entire life. When I look at the economy, I think there's about a $12 billion shortfall in early stage investing per year. And Silicon Valley does great in IT and media and entertainment. They know nothing about agriculture. And so what does every startup need? Do you know what every startup needs?
Money.
A customer.
Oh, okay.
A customer tells you what the product you need to design is. It gives you revenue, which means you don't have to sell off the company. So what we've decided is if you need entrepreneurs, risk capital, early adopter customers, and pay-it-forward people, and you're spread out. We don't have Sand Hill Road for ag. Let's have a conference. And one of my primary investors, I always ran a cook team down at the Memphis barbecue. It's a great barbecue, interesting interactions. So we created this event, and we invite 50 investors, 50 startups, 50 early adopter customers, and 50 pay-it-forward type people, and hold an event and tell them you're going to walk away with 10 mobile phones that you didn't have before that you need. And let's keep it tight, and let's talk about the fact that not will ethanol go away, but what does the ag world mean if it does go away? Not will indoor farming work, but if indoor farming occurs, what does that world look like? And so we talk about alternate futures, and it's designed to sort of break people's thinking. And sometimes I get geeked out. Hayek wrote a great paper in '45 that said entrepreneurship is all out in the field. People seeing things that central command can't see, and so we're trying to reach out to that community and see how it assembles. And hopefully we'll know about it before somebody else will invest, and we'll continue to grow.
Yeah, to me, you make a great point about innovation being customer-centric. I mean, as John said, people in Silicon Valley were inventing things that we didn't need down in Salinas, and so the purpose of having it down in Salinas was actually to where the rubber meets the road, right? And so,
Absolutely.
And so one of the things we find from an innovation perspective is everyone has great ideas, and we think we have great ideas, and it's just going to take longer than you think it's going to take.
Yep.
As I told people, we're 3 years into a 6-month R&D project on drones. Everything takes longer because it turns out there's linkages in innovation, right? You don't get to just change one thing that's new because it's going to have an impact on whatever you did before that and whatever you did the step after that. And so as companies that are adopters, I would just urge you to be patient and be supportive, to your point. I mean, that's how these startups get going, is they need a customer, they need a sponsor, if you will, who's going to help them get through the difficulties, and there's going to be difficulties, to help them get to a viable product. Then they can then serve the rest of the industry that way.
And I think, just building on that point, Carter, in terms of, Silicon Valley has been an unbelievable success. It's the center of the planet for innovation, and it's created a $3 trillion market cap in a small area. And all the points that you mentioned are all correct. However, the secret sauce is that probably 65% of all the startups and entrepreneurs are coming from somewhere else.
Yes.
It's a destination.
Yep.
And what we try to do with the Salinas Valley, the linkage with Silicon Valley, is to create a destination. And I would totally agree with you in terms of the customer, but I think it's about access. It's access to customers, it's access to markets, it's access to capital. And that's where we focused really, really hard. And we did focus globally. So today, fast forward since we started, we have over 1,200 startups from 61 countries that have come to Salinas, coming through our program. We've graduated about 4 years of companies that have now gone from zero to about $500 million in a relatively short period of time. And probably about 100 of those companies we've got 55 in the Western Growers Innovation Center doing business in the fields. We probably have another 50 to 60 companies at scale that are in the fields doing business. So it's a combination of not being, too tied up on the turf that you're trying to have yourself, but create an open platform where people want to come. And I think going back to the customer side, we were fortunate to be able to work with, Taylor Farms and Driscoll Berries and Dole, all like within a stone's throw from each other. But we were also fortunate to work with Corteva and Coca-Cola and major corporations that are trying to solve problems. So one of the big buzzwords for big corporations today is open innovation, and they're looking outside of their company. So we really try to bring that together. And again, with our partnership with Forbes, the Forbes brand has been able to amplify our message, worldwide. And that's been a great part of kind of creating a destination and shining a light on a great city and a great location.
I would add really quick to that. I don't think there's one place where this ecosystem gets developed or where the magic happens. And in fact, we've had so many great conversations with John and Bruce and Paul, with you and many of the others we met in Salinas over the last year. I really think our governor said it really well this morning when he said, we're not trying to compete with Silicon Valley, we're trying to complement it. Mm-hmm. And so when I think of what John just said about the initial investors for you, but as you now think about Corteva and Land O'Lakes and others that are here in a Midwestern presence, we have an opportunity, I think, to draw a line or build a corridor of some kind, or maybe create an even larger ecosystem that bridges
Carter's
these
investing
regions
around the world, right?
Right.
Yeah, we look everywhere, and we look for these patterns of engagement because there's more, it just speeds the process up.
Right. Yeah.
I will open it up to questions, but there's just a couple of more things I want to make sure that we cover. I was interested, we've got the Purdue University Innovation Showcase out here. We had the University of California sponsored it in Salinas. But one of the things that I found really interesting about Salinas was there also had to be other alternatives. And so for the kids, maybe third generation field laborers, and the kids don't want to be out picking strawberries, but maybe they don't have the financial wherewithal, or maybe they don't have the grades to go to UC Davis or go to one of these big ag powerhouses. And anyway, over the course of time, I got to know Hartnett Community College really well. And it was amazing to me that they were graduating, they were giving certificates to kids who, basically didn't have any interest in picking strawberries, but maybe they did have an interest in technology or how it could be applied to agriculture, which they knew. Right. So I'd just be interested, how did that, and I know that Hartnett's got a lot of industry support, sure, but I'd just be interested, and quickly, but how that played a role. And then Beth, I'd love to, I've become aware of Ivy Tech.
Right.
You've now got Purdue Global. I don't know. I think it's very interesting, these efforts to educate folks who may not, for whatever reason, have access to Purdue or to UC Davis or these other ag powerhouses?
Yeah, let me answer you quickly. To Hartnett's credit and to Cal State Monterey Bay, they reached out to industry and formed industry advisory groups to say, what can we as educational institutions be doing to help you and help your businesses and help the community? And so they were proactive in that way. From our perspective, from labor, it was pretty clear. If you look at our labor force in the field, very difficult jobs. Stoop labor, cutting lettuce or harvesting strawberries. Our labor force is getting older by almost a half a year every year. In other words, we weren't replenishing our labor force. Second generation immigrants don't want these jobs. They're not going to go work in the field like their mom and dad are working in the fields. And so it's pretty clear timeline that we're going from our current labor force to zero. And so we've got that timeline to automate, right? Either automate our harvest processes, automate our production processes, or our seed variety differentiation. You know, there's lots of things we can do to figure out how to take labor out of what we do. And we've got a limited time to get that done. And that's why working together is so important.
And for us, you mentioned Ivy Tech Community College. That system here in Indiana is just completely and totally linked to agricultural innovation and career pathway development. And in fact, I think a lot of times we think that our higher ed institutions tend to be more in conflict or in competition with one another. But actually, Purdue University and Ivy Tech have actually built a tremendous pathways program where a student who can go to Ivy Tech and maybe pursue more of a trades-based or a technical opportunity in agriculture actually then has the opportunity to transition into a full 4-year path in an agricultural field. But we have other schools that are building standalone ag programs. Huntington University, a small faith-based college in northeastern Indiana, has a dedicated agricultural training program, and a few others. So I think we're trying to figure that out too.
I think
did
on
want to
the
open this up
younger
to questions.
side of things as well is that we kicked off 2 key initiatives, getting young kids interested in coding early, and we focused on kids from the age of about 10 years to about 15.
That's happening.
And you know, the talent pool is not there, so you got to work on the future. And that's been a phenomenal success. We've probably 7,000 kids that have gone through that are now coding and creating apps and solutions for the agriculture industry. And in parallel with that, you know, when I was growing up, you know, my career path was I go to college, I get a job, and I move along that career path. I didn't think about entrepreneurship as the first place I should start or whatever. So building a culture of entrepreneurship is a really long-term commitment to what you need to do. So getting kids into entrepreneurship at a very early age. So we ran those kind of 2 key areas, one on the technology side and on the entrepreneurial side. And that has actually, you know, you get the flywheel going, not just for this year and next year, but for next number of decades.
Yeah.
I've got like a million questions, but we are going to run out of time. But Carter and everyone, you know, one of the things when I think of Silicon Valley, I think of the right to fail. And not just the right to fail, but if you fail at really good initiatives, it's a plus for your resume. In other words, you're not ostracized.
You learn more from failure than
You're not
success.
thrown out of the industry.
Yeah.
Where are we in ag tech, though? Because I do feel like it's somewhat precarious, and some of these companies are generating quite a bit of hype, quite a bit of investment. If they fail, is it a big blow? Is it a big blow to the ag tech ecosystem?
No, because we've got to feed a lot more people. The labor force is changing. The industry is not digitized. This is the bottom of the digitized. So the forces at bay in terms of the overall economy demand an infusion of innovation. So we'll learn. I mean, it'll be interesting to see what happens next with Indigo. We are long on Benson Hill. You know, I know all the it'll be great, it'll be awful stories internally, so it's like raising a kid. So I'm not afraid of that. And to some degree, I'll say our job is to go, we're expecting 8 out of 10 things that we invest in will be failures. So it's sort of like, so what?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we've got, at Taylor Farms, we've got 31 or 32 innovation projects going right now. So there's going to be failure, right? If 5 of those end up being successful, I'd be grateful for that. But there's so much opportunity for discovery in our business and in your businesses out here too, that it's just a ripe environment for AgTech innovation.
And I think the macro picture in terms of that discrepancy between supply and demand, you know, cost is a race to the bottom, innovation is a race to the top. And I think these technology companies, like the critical mass from the last 5 years of these AgTech companies, you know, investment in AgTech, $2 billion 5 years ago, $10 billion. So it's growing faster than AI, and it's the hottest thing everybody's talking about. So there's real traction, and I think this last year with some of the acquisitions that have happened, significant trade sales, with, you know, Corteva's, you know, acquisition, you know, with Granular, John Deere's acquisition of Blue River Technology, you're starting to see that flywheel go. I don't see major IPOs in the next couple of years, but I think that trade sale, the engagement by the big corporations, I think we've got a phenomenal flywheel going that's going to be going for a long time.
I know we stand between you and lunch, but I did want to open it up for if there are any questions. Right here?
Thanks very much for your thoughts. I work at a venture capital firm called Highland Capital Partners, and we're trying to get our heads around the ag tech space in general. We're patient, we try to be thoughtful, we don't mind taking time to work with entrepreneurs, we love it. One of the things we're having a hard time understanding is what the total addressable market is for new ag tech startups. Obviously, agriculture is a huge, huge space, but we're trying to think about, in the early days, who are the farmers and the companies that are willing to spend money on new tech, and what sort of scale do those early adopters represent? When you're talking about Silicon Valley, there's, you know, people will spend money on new endpoint security all day long. How do we think about the farmers that are willing to spend money on new tech?
I'm sure Carter will have something to say on this. First and foremost, we look at it from field right through to the consumer. Everything on innovation, you know, in the field, in the producer, distribution, retail, and, you know, going right to the consumer. So that's the most complex supply chain on the planet in terms of being able to manage. And the innovations both vertically across there and also horizontally in terms of solution solving some of the food security, traceability areas that haven't even been solved yet, and great opportunities there. I look at it, the $6 trillion is the size of the food and agriculture, you know, map that we kind of look at, and it's that supply chain is really the focus. It's not, everybody thinks immediately with AgTech going straight to the field. Yes, that's a key area, but it's such a rich supply chain to innovate on.
So, when did Genentech go public? 1978, 76? So that's what it is. So I know people who took it public, and I've had this conversation with them. So that's the time frame. The time to sort of critical mass in the market is going to be shorter. And the addressable market is, there are two things you need. You need someone to make the food, and you need someone to retail the food to people. You may not need that. Everybody else in between is going to get their cheese moved, or could. That's the ADM, Cargill, you know, but someone's got to stick it in the ground, and someone's got to present it to a customer. But everybody else's business model and that entire conversation is an opportunity for disruption. So, but it feels like when Benson Hill gets listed, that will be like when Genentech got listed.
Did we have another question in the back?
I like the complement, not compete language, and there's been a lot of good conversation at a big macro level of that, which is important, but I'm curious your thoughts on the same idea in a smaller, more niche or vertical areas. For example, I see a lot of ag tech companies in this area that know a lot about row crop producers but don't understand specialty growers. Or I see stuff coming out of Central Valley, California that know about water issues in like maximizing use of water but don't understand when you have too much water, where their technologies could play. How could we address those things if you agree that that's a problem?
I can take a shot at that. Starting anything, you got to start local and be very focused. And in California, we focus very heavily on the specialty crop area. However, the same challenges in terms of labor, water, etc., exist here, in the Midwest in the row crop area. And I think they're complementary. And a big part of the discussion that we're having here is how can we connect the two. A lot of the entrepreneurs that we've invested in California are here. They're in the fields on the row crop area. The other area we really haven't talked about is livestock and solutions in that as a vertical. So I think there's probably 6 different verticals when you kind of break down kind of the world of agriculture. And I don't think there's one destination for all. And I think this corridor between Indy and Silicon Valley, Salinas Valley is an important one that's addressing 2 big markets. And likewise, globally, there's a number of key similar challenges in different geographies around the world, and we've been involved in those, in Brazil, in Israel, and in Europe as well. So,
But one thing I'll build on this is we focus on early adopter customers. So if somebody comes in, if I can't pin down who the early adopter customer is, I won't invest. For row crop, we have mobile numbers of 1 million acres of farmland. I can call that person up. They're going to answer my phone, and my startup's going to be connected. So when you talk about water, if a water guy came to me in St. Louis, I'd say go to California. We're looking at new, cheaper genetics technology that will let people copy GMO and offer it with CRISPR to markets, break the IP barriers, but that should be launched in Vietnam. So one thing I need help with is where are the clumps of early adopter customers that are going to help these companies get going, and then we're databasing it. I mean, I keep sending more money to Salesforce and AWS to try to build those networks, because to me, the only thing that matters in our growth is understanding where those early adopter markets. So if you can help me, cwilliams@iselectfund.com, let me help me.
And I think, unfortunately, we are going to have to wrap up the conversation, but I think I'll just throw one last one out there. There's been talk about collaboration, and one of the things, not coming from agriculture, but really trying to spend the last 5 years really trying to learn it, too often, for me, it seems that AgTech innovation is still treated as a competitive advantage, and that too often the farmer's gaze doesn't really extend beyond the limits of their own farm. And it was interesting, Bruce saying, you had a lot of people all in the same business, but they really didn't like each other too much. And
right.
So I'm just wondering, as we leave here today, is there hope for collaboration? Are we seeing more collaboration? I mean, I think one of the goals of this summit
right.
is presenting AgTech innovation that you can put to work today, but it's not going to work if everyone is just out there for themselves.
So I will tell you, I have hope. It's an ongoing battle, and the battle is still being fought. What we've done so far is to essentially create the committee of the willing. In other words, those who are willing to collaborate are coming together, with the theory being we'll have successes, and that those that so far have chosen not to join the party will feel like they're being disadvantaged now by being outside the tent. And so what we're trying to do is make being inside the tent so enticing that even the last folks come in kicking and screaming.
Okay.
Well, so we've announced a corridor today. I mean, right? You asked if there's hope.
Right.
We've just said that there's going to be hope in bringing these two together. So I, like Bruce, think that there's tremendous opportunity. Just really fast, one of the things that we get great advantage from here in Indiana is that there are actually counterpart organizations to AgriNovus for those other industry clusters that I mentioned. So we get to take agriculture sometimes out of its comfort zone and start these kinds of meetups and mashups with biopharmaceutical companies, with manufacturing firms, with the tech industry, because there are other organizations like us who are there to advance those sectors too. There's a lot of hope.
And just in terms of, Carter, you mentioned it's not really about a place, it's about a region and a technology. I think the corridor here is fantastic, but there's a north-south corridor here as well. We've had a great relationship with Land O'Lakes for the last 3 years. We do a significant amount of activity, with them. Likewise, this whole corridor connecting together rather than just one point is important, and I think that's an opportunity for the future here as well.
All right, well, thank you to everyone up here in the conversation today, and I think we are about due for a break for lunch.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carter.
Now please join us for lunch in the Innovation Showcase tent.